Good afternoon. Good morning to some of you. Thank you for joining us today for Altai's What You Need to Know About the Future of Certification Programs. My name is Julie Davis. I'm the Director of Marketing for Altai Systems, and I have lost my voice. So I apologize to you all for how I sound today. Luckily for you, I am not your main presenter. Wayne Brown will be. But before he gets on, I do want to just go over a few housekeeping items. First, all of you are on mute. If you'd like to ask questions, we absolutely welcome them, and we ask that you put them either in the Q&A box or the chat box, and Wayne will answer them at the end of the presentation. Also, you will be receiving a follow-up email later today from me, and it will include the recording of this presentation. Also, it will have a short survey, very short, that we ask if you could just take a few minutes to fill out for us so that we could get your feedback on how we did today. So without further ado, I would like to turn this over to Wayne Brown. Wayne, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Julie. Appreciate that. Hello, everybody. My name is Wayne Brown. I'm the Business Development Manager here at Altai Systems, focusing on our credentialing products specifically. And I appreciate everybody taking the time today to attend this webinar, and hopefully it'll be a good use of your time. As you can see, the theme of the webinar today is the future of professional certification programs. And we've got an hour blocked out, so got a lot of content to cover. So I'm going to kind of move through this, and as Julie said, shoot your questions off to her in the chat box of the Q&A function there, and we'll address your questions at the end. So real quickly, let me just go over the agenda, what we're going to cover this afternoon, for some of you anyway. Some of you, I guess it's still morning, not further west. Basically, there are four topic areas that we're going to cover today. First one is we're going to look at the trends that are going on in today's workplace that are impacting the demand for professional certifications. The second area that we're going to cover today is talk a little bit about the next wave of learning credentials that are going on out there in the market, and how organizations like yours can adapt to them. And the third area we're going to talk about a little bit is kind of about the market for credentialing, how the traditional business model for credentialing could be under threat, and certainly is going through some changes and transformations. And finally, we're going to close out by talking about how you can leverage technology that's out there today to try to keep pace with all this activity that's going on in this fast-moving field of professional certification. And of course, at the end, we'll answer your questions. So let's start with that first topic area of kind of the new workplace and what we see is going on out there, trends in the workplace that are impacting what a lot of you folks do. And the first thing I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that's having a big impact is what we refer to as this growing skills gap that's happening today due to technology and a lot of other factors that's impacting the demand for credentialing. The first point I want to spend a minute or two on is just talking about the way the workplace is actually changing. And effectively, the way people work is actually going through a transition. And the predictions are that over the next decade or so, that the workplace is going to bear little resemblance to work as we understand it today. I'm quoting from Mark Coleman at Gartner, who put together a study on how we will work in the future. And he has put forth 5 key assertions that he thinks are going to have a huge impact. They are that, number one, middle management will in effect be replaced by small, flexible teams. Constant upskilling will outweigh tenure and experience. Basically, a hybrid workplace is going to evolve. It's going to be a combination of physical and virtual. Smart machines will be our coworkers. Artificial intelligence, devices, robotics. And by 2027, interestingly, Mr. Coleman says that people will actively seek work that gives them more of a sense of purpose. And this is going to happen earlier in people's lives instead of waiting for retirement. So in that respect, the workforce is going to change. The other area is that skills are becoming more and more prioritized over degrees. Another quote I'm using from Richard McComb from the IBM Global Practice Leader talks about new technology, in particular the digitization of work and life, is driving this need for new types of talent and new skills. And this is going to continue going forward, and you'll see that in addition to degrees, they're not always a prerequisite for jobs, even high-skilled jobs. McComb quotes that in the case of IBM in 2017, that they hired, that 15% of the IBMers hired didn't even have a bachelor's degree. So we're seeing some changes there in terms of what employers are looking for. The other factor that is really having a big impact on credentialing going forward is this concept of what we refer to as the shelf life of a learned skill. And quoting from an interesting book that's called A New Culture of Learning, was put out recently by the authors John Seely Brown and Douglas Thomas. They talk about this concept of a half-life of a skill, and they say that the half-life of a learned skill now is a mere 5 years. And what that means is that basically much of what you learned 10 years ago is obsolete, and half of what you learned 5 years ago is irrelevant. So, tying that together, that in 2017 there were 6.2 million job openings in America that were unfilled, compared to 5.6 million in 2016. And basically, companies are struggling to find the right workers now with the right skills, actually slowing down the potential growth of the economy. So in summary here, the shelf life of digital skills is shrinking, and as these new technologies become available, old skills are quickly becoming outdated. So that skills maintenance in this rapidly changing technological world is another challenge to keep up with. The other areas that basically in this particular topic is that the companies are all actually altering their business models to have to, to adapt to these new skill sets. An example is AT&T. AT&T actually notified 100,000 of their employers last year that their job roles would not be relevant in 10 years. So all of this kind of combined in this particular area to say that credentialing is becoming more important, and that employers are going to need to set themselves apart from the crowd, and these skills are becoming as equally important as formal education, and employers are putting more emphasis on upskilling and retraining their current workforce. The next trend area as far as the new employer workplace is around HR and recruiting strategies that are changing because of all these new technologies and so forth. The first point here is this whole concept of a new approach to human capital management, and effectively employers are having to adjust their training and recruiting strategy due to this growing skills gap in the workforce. HR leaders are now focusing on talent management and recruiting, and the important role technology and data is going to play in driving these initiatives forward. And retaining top talent in this area of increased job optionality and competition is going to continue to be top of mind share in the HR arena. The other area that's or trend is this emphasis on upskilling and training current workers. So employers are going to continue to place more emphasis on upskilling and retraining their current workforce as they're having these issues finding the correct skills. And they're going to be investing more heavily in the current workforce to close skills gaps. Basically, the digital economy is demanding new ideas and new business models, and this is going to cause businesses to have to change their recruiting strategy. So the HR is going to have to experiment with new ways to retain and recruit the right type of resources. And finally, the Chief Human Resource Officer role is changing. And again, I'm referring back to Richard McComb, who's the IBM Global Practice Leader. And Richard uses this kind of a quote here: in the digital age, progress is driven by people in experience. In other words, organizations are going to be more likely to succeed in the new area if you create the best experiences for your customers and employees. And this importance of experience means that CHROs have to rethink their role, and they're really in the what's referred to as the digital people experience business, whether they like it or not. So, you know, this trend in terms of HR and recruiting strategies will continue on as this transformation continues with all the technology that's going on out there. The other big trend that's extremely important in impacting what's going on in terms of credentialing and the workforce is the shifts in the labor market that we'll talk a couple of minutes about. And the labor market's undergoing a tremendous transformation right now, responding to several paradigm shifts around demographics and work advancement and the aging workforce and what we call the sharing economy. The first factor that's going to continue to have an impact is kind of this, what we call the nature of entry-level work is changing from what it used to be. And in particular, we're beginning to see Generation Z is entering the workforce. So just as we thought we figured out millennials, you know, the workforce is now starting to absorb this new generation, which consists of about 72.8 million people that are included in this group, born between the mid-1990s and the early 2000s. And these folks are now entering the workforce. So, you know, so just now a lot of us have been figuring out how to create a culture for millennials to thrive. We need to start thinking about, you know, how this new generation entering the workforce is going to impact things. So I've got one slide here I'll walk through, and this was created by from a Forbes magazine article. So this is what Generation Z is looking for in the workforce. And just a real quick comparison that they came up with, comparing millennials to Generation Z. So you can see the top row is talking about millennials, and Gen Z is the bottom row. So millennials are, you know, we're working for purposes and not paycheck. Generation Z is more interested in the money and job security as motivators. Millennials are pursuing, you know, personal development, whereas the Generation Z is really more interested in, you know, personal satisfaction. Again, millennials were kind of no to bosses and yes to coaches culturally, and Generation Z is more interested in mentors and honest leaders. Again, millennials don't like annual reviews, but more of an ongoing conversation. And again, Generation Z is more into mentoring and feedback on a consistent basis. The millennials, again, don't like to fix weaknesses but enhance strengths, where the Generation Z is more interested, because of the recession and things like that, are more, maybe a little more cynical and believe in winners and losers. Generation Z, obviously, I mean, millennials have a more collaborative mentality, where Generation Z is a little more competitive and to be judged in their own merits. And last, with millennials, a job was not their life. And with Generation Z, that looks like it's changing to some extent, where they're more interested in salaries and benefits and advancement. So just something to start thinking about as we move on to the next generation entering the workforce, to find to be very interested. And the last thing about Generation Z is that a big factor is that they're bringing an unprecedented level of technology skills to the workforce. As we all know, these folks now coming along are growing up with this technology, but there's apprehensions about their interpersonal and communication skills. So these are kind of things around demographics. Just to close out on this subject real quickly, and this is just in general, the whole concept of the entry-level job is changing in terms of shifts in the labor market, such that entry-level jobs are almost there's an expectation that they're actually looking for people to start doing, instead of making copies and things like that, they're expecting people to actually do technical work right from the beginning. So there's the whole concept of what's expected in entry-level work is changing, and these shifts are not inconsequential, because they're going to create new opportunities and challenges for employers. The next one that we want to talk about here for a minute, of course, is the other side of this whole equation, which is the aging workforce, and we're now looking at the workforce continuing to age, and baby boomers are living longer than previous generations, and they're retiring later. Every 3 in 4 Americans today plans to work past retirement age, and a lot of them are going to work part-time. About 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 each day, yet fewer than half said they would plan to retire by 65. And a recent survey concluded that over a third of the companies preparing for this increase in older workers are really not prepared in terms of retirement benefits and health care and equal opportunity. And so if these baby boomers stay in the workforce, it will be harder for younger workers to rise up in the organizations, and could lead to more turnover and additional stress and frustration. The last topic here in terms of the shifts in the labor market is what we refer to as the gig economy, and this has a big impact on the way people progress through their careers and what their expectations are. This is part of what's referred to popularly now as the sharing or collaborative economy. And effectively, as many of you probably know, well, it's more and more common and more popular now for people to work on, off a 1099 approach rather than W-2s with, long-term employer loyalty, but more contract workers. This concept of the contingent workforce management is being reshaped by what's called the gig economy. Almost half of the executives surveyed in this survey called The Future of Work, the Augmented Workforce, conducted by Deloitte Insights, said that executives surveyed, 42% expect to increase or significantly increase the use of contingent workers in the next 3 to 5 years. And along with that, 43% anticipate greater deployment of robotics and cognitive technologies. So let me move on to the next section. That kind of closes out the terms of the trends that are going on out there in the workforce that are going to have impacts on the credentialing and professional certification fields. Let's spend a few minutes now and talk about what we see, or a little bit what we've learned about the next wave of learning credentials, which I'm sure most all of you are in the process of dealing with, and I think there's a learning curve for everybody in this area right now, because we are in kind of a transformative state. So let's talk a little bit about this next wave of learning credentials. So the bottom line is that self-directed learning is driving the need for new credentialing systems. And there are several trends that are affecting the rising popularity of credentialing. And I'm citing these from a book that's out there. Some of you may have forgotten. It's called The Business of Certification. If you haven't, it's a great read. It's available through ASAE. It's published by Lenora Knapp and Joan Knapp. And they talk about the trends affecting, what they see as the trends affecting the rising popularity of credentialing. The first one that they cite is this exponential increase in knowledge. And that is saying that basically it's increasingly difficult to master the full breadth and depth of knowledge encompassed in any profession. And the trend in most professions and occupations now is specialization. And specialty credentials have become more popular to meet the needs of these changing professions. And many fields now require multiple credentials to meet their needs. The second one we kind of touched on already a little bit, and that's the diminished relevance and short shelf life of academic degrees. And what this book cites is that in many cases, academic degrees also now have a short shelf life, just like skills. And the knowledge acquired from a degree today may be considered too generic after the early stages of a career. And rapid changes in technologies can make degrees become quickly outdated. And continuous professional development and proof of same is now essential to professional competence and career development. The other areas that they kind of cite about rising popularity of credentialing is the public demand for standards, for example, is always an impact. And as far as organizations worrying about liabilities and incompetence causing, all kinds of problems, and certifications are one way to avoid that. Regulation and compliance was the other, and a similar area where, activities that are regulated or certified occupations are less likely to be regulated, for example, and industries are more aware of potential liabilities. And the last one, of course, is the big one, which is technological innovation that is having a huge impact on virtually every industry and profession. The job skills and career paths required by employers today are largely driven by these technology changes. And workers are expected to continuously acquire new knowledge and skills. And credentialing is the process through which individuals can demonstrate they have the knowledge and skills in today's workplace. So let's go into this kind of what we call the new breed of credentials that are coming along. And I know there's a lot of confusion out there, I think, as this kind of becomes a little more established, that most all of us are dealing with. So let me start talking about some of the basic terms and what some of these new credentialing products are all about. And so first of all, let me talk a minute about the micro-credentials. The Institute of Credentialing Excellence defines a micro-credential as simply a credential that is focused on a narrow skill set. And one of the important things to note on this is that there's currently no guidelines or standards around this, and you can't necessarily characterize the features other than a micro-credential is more narrowly focused than other academic or professional credentials. Micro-credentials could play a valuable role in verifying the acquisition of knowledge and skills as they occur as compared to certifications, which assess knowledge and skills at a specific moment. But micro-credentials are becoming more and more important as part of a professional learning experience going forward. And credentialing organizations should be incorporating this new product and consumer demand into professional certification programs. And of note, though, micro-credentials are not mini certifications. So the next category is what is becoming referred to as digital credentials. And so let me give you kind of a definition here that we came up with, that digital credentials are digital forms of any type of physical credential. And these can range from a driver's license or a passport to a typical certification. And digital credentials are simply digital versions of the traditionally paper credentials that show some proof of completion or clearance or competence. And on a practical level, digital credentials should be just as verifiable as their paper counterparts. And they all should contain the individual's name, what the credential is for, who issued it, and when it expires. So there are basically three forms of learning-based digital credentials. First is test-based digital credentials. And like the name suggested, basically digital credentials awarded to individuals that can prove a competency in some subject through a proctored exam. This is often online, but can be from a testing center, as is typical in the certification business. These are typically for higher stakes credentials. The output is a digital version of a completion certificate, is often the same, however. Digital certificates, just to clarify here a little bit, digital certificates are essentially the same as test-based digital credentials, but they don't require a proctored exam to receive. And these digital certificates are often issued for completion of a course or a seminar, or they might be a digital equivalent of a certificate, a typical standard certificate that of a membership or a group or association. And last but not least is digital badges, which we're going to spend a couple of minutes on, because I think everybody will agree that this is kind of a pretty hot area right now. And they're pretty much in their early stages of growth, and as a result are much more kind of ambiguous in their application. So digital badges, as most of you probably know, they can be awarded for higher stakes accomplishments, such as competency-based certifications, passing exams and courses. And on the other side, they can be given out for almost anything, such as watching a video or attending an event. So there's a lot of what should I say? A lot of confusion and a lot of vagueness around digital badges, and I want to spend a couple of minutes here, see if we can clarify that just a little bit. So if you look at the whole what we call credentialing ecosystem, and this was a graphic that we came through a report called A Comprehensive Guide to Digital Badges from Credible. You can kind of see the big picture of the 30,000-foot view of credentialing, and you've got your typical physical credentials and achievement recognition and digital credentials over here on the right. And I guess the first point to start with is that a digital badge can become a catch-all term for almost any form of digital credential, but this is not really accurate. Digital badges are just one subset of digital credentials. And from another report from elearningindustry.com, they cite that there's basically 5 categories that these fall into, or purposes of uses for digital badges. The first is to motivate participation. It can be something as simple as that. The other is to motivate collaboration, and this is to get people in communities to be more active and so forth. Excuse me. The third is recognition and assessment, and they can be used to simply recognize quality or indicate trust. They can also be used as alternate credentials, which is a very controversial area right now because you're seeing a lot of things out there that are kind of like micro degrees. You see nano degrees, things like that, and that these are really, you know, they're not really a diploma or a degree, but some people get those things confused. And then finally, they can represent competencies, which is what I think most people in the credentialing world are interested in. And these are your typical certifications that that you would normally achieve, and then you've got this digital badge to more or less back it up. And so badges provide a more modular and flexible way of showing various levels of competency. So let me just close on badges by kind of talking about what really is the key in the professional certification world is validation. I guess probably most of you are familiar with the Open Badge Standard, and this was created by the Mozilla Foundation with funding from the MacArthur Foundation. And I think most of the industry now is settled on this industry technical specification where, and there's lots of badging platforms, digital badging platforms out there that are applying the Open Badges Standard. So badges basically allow you to extend your credentials to your users in a way that they can verify their accomplishments online and share this information. The key is that all of these need to be backed up with metadata that is able to be validated, that these are legitimate credentials. And the kind of the Wild West syndrome out there right now is there's a lot of other uses for badges, and you need to separate how you're using digital badges in your credentialing programs from a lot of the noise out there around badges. But it is a very, very, very hot area. And just one more thing in this topic before I move on, and that's this whole concept of micro degrees and nano degrees and so forth, or alternative credentials. And so there's this, we've seen a significant rise in the popularity and demand of these newer educational credentials, where some of these private industry organizations are working with educational bodies to effectively give out credentials for completing parts of a degree program, and there are some of them are legitimate, and they're calling them things like micro degrees and nano degrees. So this is another area that's kind of muddying the water out there as far as credentialing. So the extent that these much of the innovation in credentialing is not from accredited institutions, but rather from technology companies and non-institutional providers, there's a critical distinction to be made between the growing array of professional credentials with undetermined market value versus more traditional credentials that you can prove the legitimacy of. So with that, we kind of close out the conversation on the changing dynamics of the new breed of credentials. And again, please forward your questions, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. The third area that we want to talk a little bit about today is the changing, what we call the changing business of credentialing. And that obviously is something that most credentialing organizations need to be aware of. And this kind of falls into several categories, three categories actually, which is we're going to discuss. This is what we call the devaluation and the challenges of the legitimacy of professional certifications is one. Other is competition from new business models. And the last is the changing landscape for higher education and career advancement. So let's start with the evaluation of the challenge and the challenge to the legitimacy of credentials. So as we just finished talking about this proliferation of credentials and badges is something that everybody in the industry needs to keep an eye on. There was a great article written in the Forbes magazine by a guy named Michael Horn. He called it "Taming the Wild West of Digital Badges and Credentials." In the article, he talked about the fact that he attended a conference and he received an email telling him he had earned a badge for his attendance, that he could publish this on LinkedIn. And according to the article, Michael reflected on it and said that it dawned on him that the badge was simply for attending a conference. And he literally spent most of the time out in the hallways chatting and didn't even go to sessions and so forth. And his point was that it kind of reinforced a nagging thought in all the hype over receiving more and more credentials. What did they actually represent? And what would it take to make them to be more kind of, substantial? And that's something that I think the industry needs to work on, which goes right to the next point, which is capability validation is really, really critical. And that goes back to the open badges standards and, having your programs accredited like through the NCCA and so forth, that we all need to be responsible stewards when creating these new programs that include these new micro-credentials to make sure they're legitimate and verifiable through standards-based programs. And finally here is just the whole issue of, emphasizing standard-based credentials and your legitimacy with all of your credentialing products, that they stand out from the crowd, so to speak. It's going to be really important going forward. The next area that is affecting kind of the changing business of credentialing is competition from new business models and market capitalism. First of all, in many respects, credentialing is becoming big business. And even if your credentialing organization is a nonprofit in the professional field, there's still competition for a limited number of constituents in between, similar certification organizations. And in many professional fields, we're seeing an increased competition to win market share, competing for certification candidates and students and professionals in the workforce and so forth. And this trend will probably continue, and it's going to impact how you build your programs going forward. The other element here is, of course, globalization, and more or less whether, even if your program is centered completely here in the U.S., in many ways you can't get around it because obviously the global nature of the economy is going to continue, and you're going to have candidates that are from all around the world and so forth. And this is going to introduce new challenges around legitimacy and testing standards and validation and unscrupulous competitors and so forth. The other area that's affecting the competition is the fact that there's new types of providers entering the field. And you've got your big technology companies are offering their own certification programs, which we're all familiar with. Microsoft and Cisco, of course, are typical examples. And, Microsoft recently partnered with Pearson VUE and Acclaim to start awarding digital badges for their certification achievements. And these badges were, according to Microsoft, web-enabled representations of Microsoft certifications consisting of image and metadata uniquely linked to the certificate and having the ability to share your skills and verify its authenticity. And these are just two examples of industry providers that are actually directly kind of getting into this credentialing field. And finally, we're seeing the early stages of potentially the commercial sector seeing the credentialing industry as a potential for profit ventures. A couple of examples I'll cite here. There's a company out there called Credforce that's global in scope, and it's based in India, and they build themselves as the world's credentialing company. Their website kind of tagline says, "We're the world's largest, first, and only specialist in credentialing." That, is this going to be a trend that traditional certifying agencies and organizations need to be aware of this changing business climate and new forces of competition? And the challenge in this whole area is that there's no national framework really existing for developing and ratifying credentials. So the market for competency-based credentials is not really fully formed or functioning, and too few businesses that are major players in the market understand or make use of these credentials. And even in businesses with mature credentialing efforts, the take-up rate for employers is not as high as it could be. So there's opportunities for all kinds of new competition to enter and alter the whole makeup of the credentialing industry. The final area kind of in the changing business of credentialing is things like that relate to the changing landscape of higher education and career advancement. So, as probably everybody knows, that's very familiar out there, the online education has really taken off. The online learning industry was worth $107 billion in 2015. Yet, we all know that these online education operations, some of them are more reputable than others. So it's going to be a growing and continuing to grow kind of a market that there's also is fraught with potential, con artists and scammers, as we probably mostly know. This is an example, is the diploma mill marketplace. According to CNN Money, the diploma mill market is a $200 million a year industry. This adds uncertainty out there in terms of credentialing, because you have diploma mill students enroll for different reasons, and some of them think they're actually on a path to an education. And then there's the question of how many of them are just trying to get that piece of paper to get into the workforce. So this is a factor that needs to be, monitored going forward. The other area here is, we talked about a little before, is these non-institutional players kind of encroaching on the semantics of a degree. So now you've got private firms that are issuing nano degrees and micro degrees and that kind of thing. But again, these are things that are kind of muddying the water and confusing the whole, professional education certification field in general. And you've got things like non-traditional degree programs. And just to give you a perfect example, you have Microsoft has launched what they're billing as their data science professional degree program. First of its kind program to offer employer-endorsed university caliber curriculum for professionals at any stage of their career. So now we've got some kind of quasi degrees that people are obtaining through private industry. So to summarize, all this kind of paints a picture of a changing landscape in the field of credentialing and certification. And certification organizations will need to adapt to these new business models and dynamics and maintain high standards and continue to differentiate yourselves in this rapidly evolving, being competitive marketplace. So with that said, I'm going to move on to the last area that we wanted to cover today, which is considering everything we've just looked at and talked about. What's a technology strategy, and how do you leverage the technology that's out there today to compete and continue to evolve credentialing professional certification programs? So let me just spend a couple of minutes on that topic. I'm going to start, this is just a few slides here, and then we'll be closing out for questions. But let me start with talking about a survey that we ran across, which was conducted to certifying organizations and professional associations. And it was basically a survey looking at the satisfaction levels and the level of kind of experience gap, we call it, that's occurring, that are, you know, the certificants and members and associations in these programs are basically not satisfied with their interactions with organizations out there today in terms of keeping up with technology. According to the study, that 63% of the respondents said that technology is a huge part of their interaction, and that they would expect their certifying organization to be equally technologically savvy, but they found, in fact, that most of the people in the study were not satisfied with the communication experience that they were getting. And ultimately, that study determined that there's a big experience gap out there that's causing a loss of loyalty, that the certificants and members are not getting the personalized kind of experience that they expect. And this was kind of summed up as what was referred to as an experience gap, and it's having a big impact on members and certificants in terms of their, you know, feeling they're, you know, getting what they're paying for, so to speak, and their satisfaction with their interactions today. And less than a third of those surveyed believe that organizations currently deliver a personalized content based on their customer provided data. So these are really the challenges to try to keep up with what's going on in this really changing space. And then ultimately, the study concluded that the technology and personalization are really the critical success factors, that organizations and certifying bodies need to be able to really address a more personalized interaction and experience. If to remain competitive, certifying organizations need to reassess these experience gaps and continuously improve the user experience at every touch point. And they need to focus on ways to deliver these experiences at every interaction. Basically, this digital landscape provides an organization such as anybody that's attending this meeting with a wealth of data, but interpreting this data and building products and communications going forward to capitalize on these trends and dynamics going on in the industry is going to be critical moving forward. And that our view is that credentialing organizations really need to understand and leverage the technology tools that are out there to better communicate and meet the needs of today's digital consumer. And ultimately, what we see is going on now is and the next slide I want to talk about kind of sums everything up, that we're all going through a transformation today, whether we realize it or not. And it's very significant. And what some of you folks may have seen this, and it's been phrased this way, but we're all going through this fourth industrial revolution. And to phrase this as it was submitted by Microsoft in an article called "The Digital Transformation of the Fourth Industrial Revolution," the fourth industrial revolution is really similar to previous industrial revolutions, like around the steam engine, electricity, and the microprocessor, that we're living through a digital, literally a transformation that's becoming referred to as the digital revolution. And this has been very disruptive to organizations of all types as far as keeping up with the way that consumers expect to interact with your organization And as we talked about, these new generations coming along have different expectations, and it's incumbent on credentialing organizations and associations to make sure you have the technology and the communications platforms to improve this customer experience. And the solutions and the tools are out there. So there are basically three drivers, according to Ralph Halpter, president of Microsoft Asia. There are three basic drivers that are making the real difference in this digital revolution that I think everybody should be focusing on now, and that's what he refers to as data, the cloud, and analytics. And that each of these taken individually are transformative in their own right, but when happening simultaneously, which is what is occurring right now, they create an unstoppable force enabling digital disruption, which impacts all organizations, industries, and roles. And the takeaways from this, to summarize really where I think most organizations need to be focusing and understanding, is that we are in an age of data, and that's making a huge difference, and the potential benefits are all only limited by how you connect the dots, along with the type of data that's collected. Secondly, today, anyone with a credit card can simply sign up for cloud resources. Computing and storage capacity out there today is infinite, and to the point where companies that have been building their own data centers for the past decade are almost at a disadvantage. And the confluence of these technologies is really forcing organizations to kind of change the way that they structure their technology strategies and look for new ways of doing things in this new landscape. And let me make one point here, and this is a quote from Ralph Halpter, which I think is really, really important, and that is that a big mistake is that people overanalyze too long, and instead of getting the feedback they need, and just jumping into this digital transformation. So, what are the action items that we would suggest that credentialing organizations take a look at as far as your technology and using technology to leverage what's going on in the future for you here? Number one is to implement what we call implement strong digital platforms, and that includes, social and the web and business intelligence, all of the things that are out there and easily accessible to leverage as far as improving your constituents' experiences. The other area is to enhance member and certificates digital experience. That's going to be critical. Establish a foundation for knowledge-based decision-making. Create an environment and culture for innovation. Achieve a sustainable customer experience. And create an audience for growth and engagement. These are technology strategic goals. I think that if your organization is addressing all of these and you're looking at the right technology tools and platforms to continue to improve your customer experience, then you'll be able to cope with all these changes as this whole field evolves. And that's pretty much a conclusion. And I want to just close by saying one thing, and that's that very quickly, who we are in Altai Systems. Of course, we're a technology company. We do consulting and develop software for professional associations and certification company organizations. There are lots of choices out there in terms of these digital platforms, and lots of different alternatives. And we're happy to discuss any of those kind of options with your teams. In summary, I'll close out by talking about the main points here. The new horizons for professional certifications are out there and extremely opportunistic. We would suggest you align your programs around high-level certifications, that you explore new programs and products in this changing workplace, that you focus on certifications to validate high-level skills, and you ensure that credentials address true employer needs and validate these skills. And last, that you employ the technology tools to meet the needs of today's job seekers and career professionals in the digital era. And let me close by saying that certifying organizations and associations need to be aware that we are in a transformative phase of how people expect to enter the workforce and advance through their careers. This, along with the demographic shifts occurring and, of course, ongoing rapid pace of technological change and use of technology, means that credentialing organizations involved with professional certification programs must adapt and deliver a customer experience that is in line with this new changing landscape. And I'm going to close and open it up to questions with one little offer that we're putting out there to anybody that attended today. We are offering a 1-hour consultation that to talk about your digital strategy and review kind of your technology platforms to anybody that's interested. And I think we'll have that in an email response where you can sign up for that as well. I thank everybody for taking the time today. I hope this was a worthwhile use of your time. And we'll open it up to any questions that anybody has.
Great. Yes, we do have some questions. One, Wayne, can you tell us several examples of personalization?
Okay, well, for example, if you have the proper tools in terms of your data analytics, you would be able to create your email programs that will have actual responses that are based on information that you already have about the client. The other area is we're doing a lot of work around communities and platforms like Higher Logic, and with the data that you have in your systems, the communications that you send out should be really directed to the interest in the specific metrics around a particular users, so that your communications are more personalized in that regard. And it all comes back to having that data in a central location and being able to, even the interactions on the website, when they go onto your website, that when you log in, the system should be able to determine a lot of things about that user, and that user's experience online is tailored to, information that you already have about them. Just a couple of examples.
All right, thanks, Wayne. Another one is, so we're an association of 3,000 members, some companies, some individuals, all of whom put out products in a crowded marketplace that's full of substandard quality efforts. In creating a certification program, we're looking at how we balance, certifying a product, certifying an individual, and or certifying a company. Any thoughts, suggestions on how to best approach this?
Well, I would say that a lot of what we talked about today would be to just, again, focus on separating what your products are and validating. We know there's a lot out there going on around a lot of illegitimate products, for even that are out there. So to, again, focus and emphasize on validating the products that you're selling, and that as well as the certifications, and just again make sure that your users and your potential customers have the information that they need to validate what you're offering is legitimate.
right. We also have a question asking you to define upskilling.
Asking to upskilling, right? So, well, I mean, in the IT field, and it's not just IT, but IT is an easier example, but that is a never-ending process, right? What you learned around, I don't know, writing C# code today, in how that is applied 6 months from now is going to be different, and so that would be one example of that. In medical community, same thing. You're always looking at an ever-changing kind of a knowledge base that needs to get updated, and employers are going to have to, and they're very much aware of that. As technology moves faster and faster, then people are going to have to adapt and have employees that are that their skills are current.
All right. So we are actually at the 1 minute after 3 o'clock. But you guys have amazing questions, and we are so thankful to you for that and for your time and participation today. On behalf of Altai Systems, I would like to thank you for your time and for your participation. And here is our contact information. Here, if you want to contact Wayne directly, as well as keep a lookout for my email later today. We're always here. If you have any questions, happy to answer them. And as you can see, we've got a couple of other webinars coming up, and we hope that you will also be a part of those as well. So again, thank you very much, and have a great afternoon.